Hello and welcome to today's virtual experience from the Kentucky Historical Society. Over the last several weeks, we've explored the buildings and exhibitions on our campus here in Frankfort and toured sections of our main exhibition called A Kentucky Journey. That's where I am right now. Today, we will be examining Kentucky experiences and artifacts from World War II. Teachers, we will also be providing a close look at our traveling trunk resource that is available to you during the school year. Although we are closed to on-site visitors, we offer an array of virtual programs and online services to educate and engage with you through Kentucky history. My name is Greg, and I am your voice today. So be sure to ask lots of questions and let me know you're here. Also responding to your questions and providing more information in the comments section is our marketing administrator, Dana Zinger. We are so glad that you've joined us today. Our guide for today is Teacher Programs Manager, Claire Gwaltney.
Hi everybody, good afternoon and welcome. We're so happy that you're joining us today. Like Greg said, my name is Claire, and today we are going to be exploring Kentuckians during World War II, and we're going to use our traveling trunk that we send out to classrooms across the state. And it's very timely that we're talking about this topic today because tomorrow, May 8, 2020, is actually the 75th anniversary of WWII Day, which was victory in Europe when Germany surrendered to the Allies.
How cool. Did you plan it that way, Claire?
I wish I did. But so if any of our friends from Europe are watching, happy WWII Day, one day early. Now, World War II was a major event in the 20th century, and it was very significant in U.S. history because the United States really took a central, very prominent role on the world stage. World War II lasted from 1939 to 1945, and the U.S. got involved in 1941 after our naval base at Pearl Harbor was attacked. So that meant that we were fighting countries like Germany and Japan, and fighting alongside countries like England, France, and Russia. And this was truly a world war where countries everywhere were affected because they were either actively fighting or because they were occupied by an enemy force. Kentuckians, like so many Americans, also participated in and were affected by World War II, both on the front lines and on the home front. And we're going to talk about Kentuckians in both these areas today. So let's start off by talking about our Kentuckians who were active duty in the military. Let's see. Many Kentuckians either joined the military by choice or because they were drafted, which means that the government called them up and forced them to serve. So here we have some artifacts that an active duty service member from Kentucky would have carried with them. So for example, we're going to take a closer look at some of these. This is a helmet, steel, pretty sturdy. Here's the inside.
I kind of want to see that on your head now.
I don't think I have the right hair for it today. Oh, no, it's
Oh, look at that.
very heavy.
Oh.
It's very heavy. But something I would like to ask you guys about, to answer in the chat box, what do you think a helmet could have been used for during World War II? So put your answers in the chat box.
Besides just wearing on your head?
Besides wearing on your head.
Okay.
Answer, what do you think a helmet could have been used for? And while you think about that and answer, we're going to look at some other artifacts here.
So teachers, we're looking at things from our traveling trunk, and these things can be delivered to you through the school year.
So this might be an artifact that you remember from a virtual tour a few weeks ago. This is a sewing kit from the Civil War period, and these were commonly called housewives because in the 1860s, men typically didn't mend their clothes. They had a wife or a mother or a sister to do that for them. But when they went off to war, they had to mend their own things. And so the women in their lives would make these little sewing kits and send them along with them. So buttons, needles, thread, pretty simple. Well, in World War II, service members still needed their own sewing kit, but they were issued these. So this little kit, I think that it's made out of a really heavy cardboard and then covered in canvas. Mm-hmm. And when you unzip it, you have everything you need for sewing. So you have some needles, there's a couple buttons in here. Here's a little box of safety pins. There was probably a pair of scissors stashed up here. And then you have the different color thread. And something that I think is kind of neat is you'll notice there's no red, there's no orange, there's no purple. That's because uniforms didn't come in those colors. They came in black and white and olive drab. So those are the colors that you get in a sewing kit. Service members today, they are still issued little sewing kits when they go to boot camp, but they're not nearly as sturdy and they don't hold up as well. In addition to that, we have this really cool artifact, which is probably my favorite one in the entire trunk. This is a gas mask. And one of the reasons I love this is because it has a Kentucky connection. So you may remember from a previous virtual tour that we talked about inventors, and Garrett Morgan, a man from Paris, Kentucky, invented this, a fire hood that let firefighters go into a burning building and still be able to breathe. This is a picture of his patent that he submitted to the US Patent Office, and then a photograph of his early fire hood. Well, the neat thing about the gas masks is that the technology that Garrett Morgan created was used in gas masks during World War I, World War II, and some of that technology is still being used today. So here we have a World War II era gas mask, and you can see it's kind of similar. It still has the two tubes going down the side, just like Garrett Morgan's, with this canister at the bottom.
Yeah, he's got the long tubes that reach down to the ground behind his feet there, but this one goes to a canister.
And I'm guessing that this must have been used by the Navy because it says USN.
That makes sense.
Top. And you can see the back side. You have this elastic to put it over your head and secure it properly.
So we're glad to have so many of you guys watching and joining us. Earlier we asked a question, what are some other purposes for the steel helmets that the soldiers were wearing? Respond in the comments and let us know what you think. What are some other purposes for a steel helmet like this one?
Does anyone have a guess yet?
Not yet.
Would this picture maybe give you a hint?
Oh, wow, look at that. We're gonna tease there.
So during World War II, many service members were constantly on the move, which means that all they could carry with them was what they carried on their backs. This meant that they didn't carry many personal possessions because they had all this regulation gear with them. They had these heavy helmets, they had big boots, big packs, weapons, all of that was very heavy. So not only did everything that they carry with them have to have a specific purpose, it had to be multi-purpose. And helmets were something that were multi-purpose. So you'll notice in this picture, here we have two Army nurses, and here's their helmet. One has her hands in it. Anyone have a guess what they might be doing?
Not yet. Jessica said she'd use it to sit on.
Okay, so you could totally use it to sit on if you didn't want to sit on the dirty ground, if you wanted to keep your uniform nice and tidy, or dry maybe. But you could also use it for things like this. You could use it as a wash basin. You could use it as a laundry tub. You could use it to soak your feet after a long day of walking. You could use it for your dinner. If you weren't lucky enough to have a mess kit, maybe you would put your chow in your helmet and just eat it like that. So everything had to be multi-purpose, and this is a sturdy piece of equipment that could have been used in a lot of different ways. So these are some of the items that Kentuckians would have carried with them when they were out on the front lines. But World War II was also an event that impacted Kentuckians on the home front. And the civilians left behind had to adapt to a lot of changes because the armed forces always had to come first. The government wanted to make sure that the fighting forces had all the resources, all the materials they needed so that they could quickly end this war. So one of the things that the government instituted was rationing. And here we have some propaganda posters from World War II. This is a really cool collection of items that we have here. A huge collection of propaganda posters from the Glasgow Public Library. It was donated to us many years ago. And I think Dana is going to share some links to those in the chat box so you can explore more.
You know, as I'm looking at this, you know, in my lifetime, I'd never been rationed. But here recently, you know, I've been to the grocery store where I'm only allowed to buy a certain number of pieces of meat or, a certain number of rolls of toilet paper, you know?
And that is a great point, because that is exactly how it was in World War II. The government set limits on how much civilians could buy of various products. Things like meat, butter, and sugar were very common. And Americans were happy to make sacrifices and do what they could to help the troops. So they figured out ways to cope with that. So for instance, we're gonna look at this recipe book. It's called Recipes to Match Your Sugar Ration. And it was put out by the government in 1942. At the top it has the reminder, "Victory begins at home." And inside are a collection of recipes that you can make with sugar substitutes. So here we have two, one for oatmeal cookies and one for peanut butter cookies.
Oatmeal cookies are my favorite, Claire.
That's right, I forgot about that. Well, here you can see that the substitute for sugar is either sorghum, cane, corn, or maple syrup. So everyone watching at home, this is when you want to take a screenshot, because this would be a really fun weekend activity to do some historic cooking in your home. See if you can make these recipes or their modern day equivalents.
So to do that, if you swipe to the left, or let's see, swipe to the right, the comments will disappear for just a moment, and then you can take a screenshot and bring the comments back.
We've had teachers and students make these cookies before. I've been told that they're really good. So I encourage you to kind of experiment with that in your kitchen, and definitely let us know if you make these. Share some pictures on social media. We'll get hungry.
Yeah. Peanut drop cookies. I don't know which one I think I'd probably want the oatmeal.
Peanut butter cookies, just to Claire. You can leave them here at KHS. I'll come pick them up. Now, in addition to rationing food, gas was another thing that was commonly rationed. And again, this was so that the fighting forces on the front lines had enough gas and enough fuel to get them where they needed to go, to move supplies, to keep them warm. And so in this propaganda poster here, we have a lady saying, "I'll carry mine too." She's doing her bit. She's on foot carrying her groceries, just like these soldiers on the front lines are carrying their weapons. And the poster is a reminder to civilians that we need to ration our gas and our rubber for our fighting forces.
Dana said her granddaddy served as an engineer and was injured at D-Day at Omaha Beach.
Well, Dana, thank you so much for his service and for keeping his story alive. We appreciate what he did for us.
And Hannah said Victory Gardens could help with that too.
That's a great point, Hannah. People were out in their backyards growing food to supplement their ration, again, so that commercially produced food could go straight to the front lines. And people started growing victory gardens. It was something that communities did, schools did. A lot of scout troops would grow victory gardens as well. And we have a poster about that behind us. Greg wants to pan over.
Yeah, there we go. I got it.
Now, another thing that civilians back home had to get used to was the presence of German POWs. Now, POW stands for Prisoner of War. And what would happen over in Europe is when Americans captured German soldiers or sailors, they would bring them back here to the United States to put them in POW camps. And often these Germans would help supply our labor force. So the Germans would go out and work at farms, cutting timber, doing things that American men used to do before they went overseas. So we have a really, really cool collection of letters here at KHS from this man. And his name is Hans Reimer Stelter. He was a German POW who worked on a farm outside of Lexington for a family named the Pfisters. And after the war, there was a lively correspondence between Stelter and the Pfister family that we have digitized and which you can look at and read online. And I think Dana is going to post a link to that in the comments. I really encourage you to explore it. Because in these letters, both Stelter and the Pfisters talk about post-war life, both in Kentucky and Germany. They exchange information about mutual acquaintances, and they reminisce about the good times that they had during the war. And it's really, really extraordinary because here you have people who were enemies coming together under really extraordinary circumstances, and yet you can tell from these letters about the respect and the friendship that they had for one another. And so it's a very hopeful way, I think, to come out of World War II and look at the world after this horrible, tragic conflict. So definitely explore those letters online.
Yeah, the link was just posted by Dana, so.
Thanks, Dana. You won't be sorry if you check it out.
Yeah.
Now, in addition to that, we needed a lot of additional labor here on the home front. So German POWs was one way that we could solve that problem. But in addition to that, many women took jobs. So we're going to walk over here. And while we do, I want you to think about what sort of jobs did women take during the war. And I want you to share your answers in the comment box. If you need a hint, I have some hints for you. Here's a hint for you. I got another hint too. Maybe this poster is one that you've seen before. What types of jobs did women do during the war? So think about that as we talk. Put it in the chat box. And we're going to take a look at some things in our exhibit here right now. So World War II and a shortage of manpower forced women to go to work. And this was unusual because up to this point, while some women worked, many opted to stay home and take care of their families. And many women decided to work in factories. So for example, here we have a photograph of a female factory worker at the Hillerich and Bradsby factory in Louisville. And of course, they're the most famous for making Louisville sluggers.
But that's not a bat.
But that's
she's
not
making.
a bat, no, very perceptive. The slugger factory modified their machines to go from making bats to making wooden gun stocks. And we have a picture of that over here.
So there's the typical.
There's your typical Louisville slugger. I think we all know what that looks like. And here's a picture of a rifle stock made in Louisville during the war.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. Another industry that women were able to work at during the war was the bourbon industry. We all love our bourbon in Kentucky, right? So during World War II, bourbon distilleries started producing penicillin and industrial alcohol. And in fact, the Kentucky bourbon industry was responsible for making 44% of all industrial alcohol produced during World War II. And that was used in manufacturing, for medical purposes, fuel, and more.
Yet again, Claire, this seems very familiar to me.
And it should, right? So a shout out to all our bourbon distilleries right now because many of you are making hand sanitizer to combat the COVID-19 virus. So a great example of the relevance of history today, how people are adapting to these global crises and doing the best job they can.
Amanda Smith said she loves your NHD shirt.
Hi, Amanda. Now, some women, well, many of them worked in factories. Some decided they actually wanted to serve in the armed forces. So we're going to take a look at some things over here. And let's take a look at some posters first.
Sure.
So many, these are some recruitment posters targeted towards women. Many women went into the service and they worked as nurses or they worked as clerical and administrative support. Other women, though, they worked as pilots or they worked as stateside instructors who would train male service members how to do a job before they headed out overseas. And here we have a uniform from a Red Cross worker during World War II. Her name was Virginia Clift. She was a Kentuckian. And so she worked with the Red Cross, probably doing some sort of medical work during the war. And alongside those, we have some typical uniforms that our men would have worn. In the center, we have an Army uniform, actually worn by a bourbon distiller named George Arrington from Frankfurt. He was a heavy machine operator and was in France on D-Day.
Very cool.
Yeah. And then below that, we have a Navy uniform that belonged to Robert A. Schatt of Louisville. He was a hospital corpsman. I know that because of the Red Cross on his left sleeve. He was a second class.
See if I can get that
Service
really quick.
number. Yep, right there. And if you look down on his cuffs, you can see that he did something against regulations. He decided to commemorate his time in China by having his cuffs embroidered with some really cool Chinese dragons.
Is that something they would have done afterwards, or?
I don't know when he would have had that done, but he shouldn't have been doing it. But it looks really cool. And typically, of course, those cuffs would have been rolled down. So theoretically, an officer or someone in charge wouldn't have even known that they were there.
I'm going to try to get a close-up of those. That's really cool. I have never noticed that before. Let's see. Oh, there we go.
Greg's reaching for you guys. Hope you viewers appreciate that.
That's really neat.
Now, kind of returning to the subject of women, something that I learned just a few years ago is that not everybody was happy about women serving in the military. A popular slogan of the day was "Free a man to fight," or here you see "Free a Marine to fight," a little modified. But the idea was that if a woman enlisted in the military and took a job at a military base stateside, the man who was doing that job could then be shipped out to the front lines overseas where he was very needed. But of course, he had loved ones who didn't want to put him in danger. So there were some people who had really conflicting emotions about women joining the military. But it's undeniable that they made a huge contribution, both active duty and at home, into helping us win the war. Greg, did anyone have any other ideas of what women would have done during World War II?
No.
Or have a World War II story of their own that they wanted to share?
There's been a couple of those shared.
Yeah, can you share a couple of them?
Let's see. Well, I think I shared one of them already with you. So.
Well, the really cool thing about World War II is that even though it began over 80 years ago, it's comparatively recent history. So I'm sure there's people watching whose parents were involved in World War II, or for me it was my grandparents, maybe for some of you it's your great-grandparents. But that's fairly recent, and it means there's very likely a piece of World War II history in your own homes right now. So I brought in a piece of my personal World War II family history.
Oh,
remember this
cool.
picture?
Yeah.
Those nurses at their helmet? Well, this is my mom's mom.
That's your grandmother. Well, great-grandmother, I guess, right?
My grandmother.
Your
Yeah.
grandmother.
So my mom's mom was an Army nurse in the Pacific during World War II. She landed on Okinawa on Easter Sunday, 1945, which was the day the Americans invaded. And she was there for over a year working at a field hospital. And at some point, someone in camp snapped this candid photograph of her and a fellow nurse washing up using their helmet. And they sent it to her hometown newspaper where it was published. And someone clipped it out and put it in a scrapbook for posterity, very much like the scrapbooks we looked at our last virtual tour. So last week when I was putting together this tour, I called my mom and I said, okay, here's your crazy question for the day. Don't you have a picture of your mom washing up on Okinawa with a helmet? So she went to the bookshelf, she pulled out that scrapbook, and she texted me this picture. So I encourage you to head to your bookshelves, to your attics, to see what wonderful family history that you have squirreled away. And if you share that on social media, be sure to tag us at KYHISTSOC, because we would love to learn about your history and share it and celebrate it with you.
Yeah, thank you guys so very much. If you have any final questions, post them now. But we just want to thank you so much for joining us today. As Claire mentioned, our next tour, I don't know if you did mention it, but our next tour is Tuesday, and we're going to go back just a little bit in our exhibit and hit the Depression era. We're going to take a look at the Depression era in Kentucky. So make sure you follow us on all our social media and consider becoming a member of the Kentucky Historical Society to support programming like this. Visit our website at history.ky.gov/virtual visitor to learn more. Let's see, do we have any other questions? Well, Jennifer just joined us. Jennifer, look, she's wearing an NHD shirt.
Hi, Jennifer.
Look at that. And we're so glad to have you folks joining us today. Even though, we're closed to the public, it's nice to connect with our viewers and our audience still, and to share our collections with you all. I guess that's about it.
Thanks for watching, everybody.
Thank you guys. Stay safe and healthy at home, and go Team Kentucky.